Hello, and welcome back to the Have We Made It Yet podcast. It's the podcast where two creatives just starting their journey into comedy and acting in the creative space talk about the process of making it as we try to make it from the very beginning. I am the comedian portion of this podcast, Josh Young.
And I am Lucas Ng, the actor portion of this podcast.
Yes, he is. And you know what? At the top of our podcast, we usually like to ask each other the question of the podcast. Have you made it yet? So, Lucas, have you made it yet?
You know what, man? You know what? I feel closer and closer, not because of any big milestones that I've hit, but because I had a mental shift. If I may indulge you, Josh.
Indulge.
I had a pretty big audition. It was for I think it was like a Hallmark Lifetime film and everything like that.
Nice.
Pretty sizable role. And when I got my sides, I was like studying them like mad because it was a pretty big casting director that cast, pretty big shows. So I want to impress her. So I got some friends of the podcast to help me. I'm going to shout out Donald Hang and Jamie Calica. I messaged them, went on some great calls with them, and we swapped ideas and how to process the script through and through. I finally sent in my tapes after getting their notes to my agent, and he said, "Amazing work. This might be your best audition tape that you've ever sent." And you know what? Yes, because I feel more grateful for that compliment just because I put in the work. I put in that process. I reached out for help and I incorporated notes. You know what? However this plays out, whether I get the part or not, I'm going to count this as a win, just because to categorize your own craft as either a yes or a no in terms of booking the part, you can't think like that anymore. No, the whole process was what made me to be a better person, better actor, better creative. So, dude, I put in the work, and that's a win in itself. So, haven't made it yet, but closer.
Yo, that's great to hear. That's actually that's really good to hear, and especially to know that it's like you put in the work, you feel like what you did was up quality, and then also to get that acknowledgement that what you thought was correct. That's great, man. I'm really happy for you. Ooh, excited to see maybe next Christmas you'll be in like maybe a Hallmark movie.
We'll see. I mean, fingers crossed and all that stuff, but it's out in the universe. Mr. Josh Young.
Yes.
Have you made it yet?
I have not made it yet, but yesterday I did a show in Vancouver, and it was my first time doing a show in a few months in Vancouver as well. And I was doing about 10 minutes, and it was like half of it was going to be new material. So I was going to go with like a lot of new material. I changed up some of my other jokes as well. And I was going in with some more kind of a little unsure, a little bit, but I was like, I kind of just wanted to get these jokes out there so I can get some feedback and work with it. So I went in kind of like a little bit more open-minded about the experience. And then when I was there, though, I found out I was put last. I had 10 minutes to do. So I was like almost it wasn't that long of a show, but I was essentially almost like the de facto headliner. So there was some kind of pressure there. It was like, you got to end off the show well. So I was kind of like a little nervous going up. And then when I actually went up, it went so much better than I thought. Like nice. When I was up there, I managed to, because of 10 minutes, I think I slowed down, and I was able to be more comfortable in the timing and the pace of that set. That like all of my new stuff went well. It hit, and then the overall set from beginning to end, it turned out much better than I thought, and it ended up like really killing it in the show, to the point where like the producer after the show was like, "Hey, it was a great set. We're doing another show in a couple of weeks. Do you want to come back?" and stuff like that. And like maybe I'll try like hosting that show, and I've never done that before. So so I'm looking forward to potentially doing that. But yeah, I think it was a bit of a turnaround for me as well in that set, because I think that was the first one I felt oddly very comfortable on stage with the time and being able to feel more comfortable. And yeah, knowing that like about another 4 or 5 minutes of like ideas went over well, like going into the new year, I feel like I can definitely pull out a 10, no problem, maybe try to do 15. So it's all, like you said, it's process. It's all about progress, you know, step by step. And yeah, excited about that.
Congrats,
But
bro.
thank you. Thank you. But you know what? Enough about me. Let's get into today's guest, which I'm very excited about.
Yes,
because
sir.
I don't think we've had his, you know, his background on the podcast before. And we like to provide some variety for our podcast because we have a lot of actors, actresses, comedians, musicians. But we also want to try and like bring in different perspectives, different experiences as well. So I'm very excited to say that our guest today, who we both kind of have a connection with through a mutual friend, he has been a creative director for the last 2 years at the David Zwirner Galleries, which have like 3 spaces in New York, a space in like London, Hong Kong, and Paris. So kind of like a global gallery. He's been creative director there for the last 2 years, and previously was actually I'm going to make sure I get this right, senior global art director of UNIQLO. So big brand, kind of like a lot of kind of influence there. So very interested in hearing his perspective there. But yeah, we have basically our guest is pretty in there with the art community in New York, and probably also like kind of the global art community as well. So we're very excited to welcome Mr. Matthew Tsang to the podcast.
Woo! Hey guys.
Hello.
Thanks for the wonderful introduction.
No worries. Definitely, we're really excited to have you on and kind of pick your mind about the art world and your experiences as a creative director. But of course, you know, we wouldn't be doing our podcast justice if we didn't ask you that big question off the top. Mr. Matthew Tsang, have you made it yet?
That is an interesting question. I feel like maybe as a creative, it never feels like you've made it, even if, you know, a younger version of yourself would see yourself as you are now and would be like, oh, yeah, I've made it at that point. But then when you get there, you feel like you don't feel that. So I don't even know what that feeling means of making it. Right. I suspect I might never feel like, you know, I might never know what that feeling is. I mean, I know, you know, some senior executive creative directors at like mega firms, whether it's in Silicon Valley or within the cultural sector in the fashion world or whatever, who still don't feel like they've made it. But, you know, to any outsider looking in, they evidently look like they've made it. So I just think that that's something that as a creative, you're just constantly challenged by, or you're looking for challenges. And if there's a challenge that you haven't really done yet, then you don't feel like you fully kind of experienced everything. Essentially, that's a long way of saying no.
It's kind of like, I feel like we've been doing this podcast for like almost potentially like 2 years now. And initially we went in with the question of like figuring out like maybe we'll get a clearer idea of what that means. You know, of other creatives, like we want to make it, we want to try making it. But I feel like the more people we've talked to, more different fields that we're getting experience from, is like it's getting less and less clear what that really means. I feel like what happens though sometimes is when we all start getting into our creative fields, is like that's when we kind of have this idealized version of what making it is, and that might be what the clearest image could be, and then it just gets a little bit more muddied the more you experience the actual process.
Sure.
Yeah, going back then, like, do you remember when you first started, like when you first got inspired to get into art and design? Like, do you remember what making it would have meant to you back then?
I think making it would have just meant being able to live as, you know, be able to support myself financially while doing something that is creative and something that I'm passionate or interested in. Again, those are things that are super abstract, and what supporting yourself financially means, or what living comfortably means. It's constantly scaling upwards, you know, particularly when you move from experience to experience and grow older and your life goals change. But that's when I started off. That's what I probably thought making it would mean.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, especially in art and design, it just feels like it's somehow a little bit more subjective and a little harder to pinpoint down than, like, say, music or maybe even like comedy or television and film. I'm wondering then, when because you went to the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design, I'm wondering, going into that school, like, were you kind of going in with a specific idea of what you wanted to get out of the school experience, what you would learn, or were you kind of like open to what, like, opening your mind to what the possibilities could be for this direction?
I think so. I went to the graduate program there and split my time between RISD, which is, you know, shorthand for Rhode Island School of Design, and Brown University. I went in having an idea of what the graphic design program would be like, but I think that it was quickly flipped on its head when I went in there after the first year. It was an interesting, very challenging, but interesting kind of experience, which then kind of changed what my ideas of design could be. I don't know if it like eliminated my previous ideas, but I think it kind of fleshed them out or evolved it further in ways that I could never have imagined an education would. So yeah, that was my experience there.
Yeah, like I did want to also ask, because like RISD, their alumni is huge. Like they had everyone from like Seth MacFarlane to Gus Van Sant to even like David Byrne and everything like that.
Yeah.
How do you think the graduate program at RISD like really informs your work to this day?
Well, I think that with every good school, I mean, like you see this with alumni from schools like Rhode Island School of Design or Yale School of Art, and various other ones, various other institutions. And that is, it really kind of breaks down your idea of what an end product is. And it makes you kind of really focus on the act of making or the process of making. I think a lot of people, when they kind of come into art school, whether it's undergrad or grad program, they have an idea of what they want to make. They have an idea of what they're interested in. And generally speaking, especially in the first year, you see this very often with projects, whether it's architecture, design, painting, or film, or whatever, whichever kind of sector you're studying within. You generally have an idea of something that you want to make in your head, and then you kind of try and make it. But generally speaking, like the idea in your head is always superior to what you're kind of looking at. And you always try and bridge that gap between, like, why is this thing that I'm creating so much? Can I swear in this?
Oh yeah.
podcast? Okay.
Absolutely.
Why is it so much shittier than what I have in my head? Right. Particularly if you're in like a particularly kind of prestigious school, perhaps you come in with like a very high level of taste in terms of knowing who the design icons or interesting kind of like heroes that you want to kind of emulate are. and that's even worse, because the more you know, the more difficult it is for you to realize what you envision the end product to be. And I think that what was the most valuable part of school is it completely beat that out of you, because that is an absolute, like, no, you can't do that. Like, they'll just, when you work like that, which everyone does in the beginning, they will just be like, this project is garbage, because you're not learning anything. You're just kind of trying to make something that you've already envisioned from the start without actually being interested in something, breaking down what you're interested in, and then using these projects as ways of examining what you're interested in and kind of building a practice around that. And I mean, I think that this, whether you're working within a kind of commercial art practice, which would be like design, industrial design, architecture, illustration, whatever, or you're working within a contemporary fine art way of working, which could be painting, sculpture, or whatever. I think that both fields, I think this applies to both fields, this way of thinking. It leads to the most kind of original and interesting work. Original, maybe I don't want, the word authentic and original is such a tough word because it's such a loaded word. But what I will say is that it brings out the most honest work when you work in such a way, because then you're focused on exploring something that truly fascinates you and questioning that constantly.
Matthew, that was beautiful, just because, yes, like in terms of our own creative processes, we always, like, I look up to, say, Daniel Day-Lewis, amazing actor and everything like that. But I know that if I were to copy him, or at least don't bring my own truth into it, it would just be a poor parody of whatever that he brings to his own acting game there.
Yeah.
And I find that so powerful. Even if you come up with an original concept, whatever you have, and you try to replicate whatever's in your head, it becomes like a poor parody. It will not be whatever is truly in your head. And in terms of honesty and creating the work, it really just comes out of what you had just said. It comes out of the progress, the progression of it, as opposed to the final end product. Then that was beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. I would say I'd add one additional thing, and it's that the most valuable thing school taught me is never be precious with your work, never be precious with your ideas. Always be willing to, don't be stubborn and try and be like, this idea isn't working, but I'm going to force it to work. Like, allow yourself to be changed by those ideas. And if something doesn't work, that is a valuable learning process to maybe evolve whatever you're working on in a different route, which, it's never a waste of time, because in order to get to that new route, you had to try something, and for that not to work, to discover something else.
Yeah, no, I think what you said, like, rings true with a lot of different creative processes. And like, I think even hearing from a variety of different guests from different backgrounds, like, we always also get that sense where it's like, don't be too precious. The more you try to hide or, like, keep your ideas to yourself and, like, not really, like, expand or rethink them or, like, try to adapt them, the more you get stuck and you just can't really learn from the mistakes and keep growing from there. In that sense as well, like, of course, like, trying to find that authentic self or authentic style is definitely almost like can be a lifelong process. And then during that time as well, though, especially for, like, new artists trying to get into that sphere and figuring that out, it's like, what you may think is authentic and, like, your style may not be, like, if we put it into, like, real world or, like, trying to make enough to support yourself, is like, it may not be something that can put food on the table at that time. It's like, in that spectrum, then, like, what advice would you give artists that are trying to find that authentic self, but then also try to make it so that they can at least keep focusing on that authenticity as opposed to being pulled away to like more commercial or like, you know, monetary influences?
I mean, I think when I started my career, I was very maybe against kind of being pulled into that monetary kind of direction. Actually, like right out of school, I was offered two jobs. One was working with a new team, which is now like a huge team at Google, which is Google's creative lab. They were developing material design, which is one of their major kind of design divisions. But that was like when it started. But the opportunity to join that versus moving to London and working at a tiny boutique design studio, but which I had immense respect for, and I thought was, you know, and still feel is true, one of the best design studios in the world, for like next to no money. Fortunately, you know, I had the and I think this is always, sorry, this is a tough kind of idea to articulate, but what I think I'm trying to say is it's always important to be honest with yourself, and always important to be honest when giving advice about the context in which you were able to make certain decisions. I didn't have to worry about, I went to an extremely expensive school. Brown and RISD are both hyper expensive, you know, private colleges in the US. And as an international student from Canada, that is an immense amount of money. I was lucky enough to have very supportive parents who were able to support me through that without needing to take on student debt. And as a result, I had the kind of financial freedom to make a decision that I don't think a lot of creatives can. And I think that needs to be addressed, because I can easily just say, yeah, you know, you should always take the job that does, like, that you're passionate about, that regardless of whether or not it pays. Because I did that, and that was so fruitful and amazing of an experience for me. But I think as I grew older, I realized, or grew older in my career, I realized that that's like such a short-sighted and arguably irresponsible way of thinking of things. Because I think it's very important to just be honest about where you are in life and kind of what your needs are. So, for example, if you have a lot of student debt, it is okay, I think, in my opinion, to take a job that is, you know, very good, that will that'll support you financially.
Right.
But what I will say is that you should always see both as kind of equal but different ways of approaching the creative field. I think that there's value in both. I think that there's immense creativity that you can find in major brands like Google, Apple, Nike, you know, some of the most inspirational advertising and influential advertising and narratives come out from these companies, which, you know, have their issues, but at the same time also have the largest audience reach and have some of the best creative talent out there. And that is interesting. There's interesting work to be done there, as much as there's a lot of interesting work to be done in a much more independent kind of design practice, if you wanted to work that way. Or if you are an artist, you know, it's okay to, like, I know a ton of, I do know a ton of artists in New York who support themselves, let's say, through creative coding. So they're like creative technologists. On a freelance basis, they'll work with companies and they'll work with studios to, you know, develop digital experiences on a more commercial scale, which supports their personal art practice and their personal kind of interest in creating things on the side. You know, there's so much opportunity now in, I think, particularly for younger creatives coming out, to not be tied down to a specific kind of full-time job. There's value there, but for the option to kind of straddle both lines, like when you need to pay those bills, take some commercial clients, take some jobs. There's no shame in that. It's all good. And then just don't lose sight of the work that you're really passionate about, that you want to make. I think it's just really about that, just not losing sight of what your goals are, right?
Yeah.
I think that like it's totally cool if your goal is to just work your way up as a creative, as a product designer in tech. That's totally chill. Much like it's just as interesting of an endeavor as, working as an independent, developing your own independent kind of design practice and working purely with artists and cultural institutions. That's fine too.
Yeah.
Like they're all,
cool. I mean, like, I think what's interesting is like now we just naturally kind of got into that blending of art and technology. I do want to ask you, because, artists, like we just went through having that push and pull of like monetary versus authentic. With kind of like the changes now in like art and technology, I did want to get your perspective on NFTs, because that's like now a completely new type of style of kind of patronage, kind of where artists now are able to create and mint their own NFTs and actually get some of that monetary payment for their work in a way that hasn't been done before. And it's still a very burgeoning new technology. I was wondering, like, what is your perspective on NFTs and kind of the art space right now?
I think NFTs are like they're a very interesting kind of articulation of the art world. I actually have some friends of mine who are very heavy in that space and have actually done very well for themselves over the past year, just like operating in that way. And I think it's fantastic. I think what is interesting about NFTs is less maybe the form that it is right now. I think it is so early and so young in its development. But I think what is interesting about it is that it kind of creates a new way of looking at art as a platform, as a singular platform, because NFTs themselves are platforms. They're individual platforms within which you can build a community around that artwork, which is very interesting, right? That's like flipping the art world upside down, because in the current space in the art world, you have contemporary art galleries. Like, for example, you have like major blue chip galleries like David Zwirner, Pace, Gagosian, Hauser and Wirth, where they have they represent a roster of artists, right? And the artists kind of thrive on this gallery model because a gallery exists to help them sell their work, get their work in institutions, help those artists grow. But in many ways, the platform is then the gallery, and the artist is then part of the platform. The artist is a part of this larger platform, which is a gallery, right? Whereas now that's completely shifted with NFTs, where the artists are creating their own platforms with their work, and that's where communities are emerging around them, which is very interesting because in many ways it harkens back to the pre-gallery model, where you had artists, you had their patrons, and like the work that they created meant something to those patrons and that community, and it was much more of a communal space. It was much more part of like the public forum, where it's now it's with commercial art galleries. I mean, they absolutely have their place. It's just a different model. So they're two different contexts, which I find interesting. I don't think necessarily one is, because I do think that there is a lot of value in commercial art, contemporary art galleries, in that they bring to the artists. I just think it's like a different model of working, and I think that both can kind of coexist, which is cool.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. And just it's so interesting to see where the space will take off. And like, even just because it's only been a year, it's hard to imagine really the crypto space pre-January of this year was not in the mainstream yet. It just because of Bitcoin suddenly hitting all-time highs, now everybody's now starting to pay attention to all these new engines of kind of like creativity and innovation. Looking at kind of as your position as like a creative director in a commercial art gallery, and like how the world has been changing so much, especially with COVID and everything right now, I'm wondering, with that model, have you seen kind of shifts in the art space with kind of maybe pandemic inspired art starting to come into that space as well? Because usually, I think, in my opinion, art reflects life. And then in periods of great turmoil, sometimes you get some of the greatest expressions of art. I'm wondering if you're seeing that as a creative director now, in like new artists or current artists trying to tackle what we've all been experiencing in the last few years.
I think that it will definitely be it is definitely part of the dialogue. I think it's like, I think that generally speaking, at least with the artists that that are represented by David Zwirner, or even artists that I'm interested in personally, they tend to stay away too much from like overly direct kind of re-representation of affairs that are going on in the world. I actually would argue that the BLM movement was more impactful on the art world than COVID is.
Right.
At least in terms of fine art. I will say that maybe the place where COVID had the most impact on, in my opinion, is more ideas in filmmaking and in video, right? In film, video, mediums like that, or photography. I think that that's where maybe that it challenged people who wanted to create through that medium to explore different venues. I do remember there was that one, that director Bo Burnham, who did that amazing kind of bizarro, like one-man show thing in the pandemic. That was like really fantastic, and I love that. But I do think the one thing that COVID has had a lasting effect on in the contemporary art world is, at least in the artists themselves, is probably this idea of reflection, and the idea that it has given them time and space to really explore new ideas or explore things that they want to, that maybe wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have that time of isolation.
Right.
And that time of like great tension and anguish and all of that stuff. So I think that every artist would take that and channel that in their own different way. Yeah.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, no, it's those are some great points about like kind of where the art world is right now. And I feel like usually we also kind of ask at this point, because we're getting close to the end of the podcast, for our guests, is like, what is kind of like making it mean to you now? But I feel like just talking to you, like that seems like not the right question to ask. So I think what I'll ask is, what is something in the next year that you're looking forward to in terms of your work right now?
I think that actually the thing I'm looking most forward to is seeing how, and this is to your previous question, it's not so much the artists, but seeing how the art world and maybe the gallery world
Right.
kind of shift in new ways, where, new ideas of what art is, and the transparency around the creation of art, the transparency around the selling of art, the transparency around like economic disparity, which is, in the art world, it's very visible. And how, due to the pandemic, a lot of young galleries had to shut down just because they didn't have the means to really sell art anymore, because it's like no one was traveling.
Yeah.
No one was moving around for the past year, a good chunk of the past year and a half to 2 years. So I would say that I'm excited to see how the gallery world shifts to respond to the new kind of conditions that we all are faced with, new economic conditions, new political and social conditions and cultural conditions. I think that's what I'm excited about.
Nice, cool. Yeah, no, I think that's some great stuff, and it's good to keep on our minds as well to see where the art world takes the next little bit, and adapts to it and sees where it happens there. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on to the podcast. We always like to finish our podcast with a little, kind of like a palate cleanser game at the end. We were talking about push and pull, monetary, authenticity. Let's just go down to the base level and see what your mind tells us when it gets some word prompts. So okay. I'll have 10 words. Lucas will have 10 words. And then as we go into our 10 words, just say the first word, idea, or thought or image that comes to mind with each of these word prompts. So Lucas, you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. All right, Matt, you feel good? You feel loose?
Yeah, I took my hat off, I'm letting loose.
Hat was all business. Hat was all business.
Awesome. Okay, first word of 10. Essence.
Clothing.
Nice. Fear of God.
Brand.
Nice. Virgil.
Louis Vuitton.
Nice. Rhode Island.
Providence.
Nice. Lo-fi.
Music.
Nice. Cause.
Shit, I fucked up. I didn't say the first word. That I dislike.
Oh, interesting. Oh. Culture.
Exciting.
Home.
Nostalgia.
All right. And the last word, Matthew.
I fucked up again. I didn't say that. I was just going to say me, or like Tsang, my last name. Cool.
Love it. Love it. All right, Josh, you ready?
Yes. Okay, let's go with Josh's 10 words, which is always the same 10 words throughout each series. So let's give it a try. All right, Matthew, clear your mind. Empty into an empty space. Your first word is childhood.
Fond.
Banana.
Slip.
Sun.
Burn.
Solitude.
Peaceful.
Goal.
Difficult.
River.
Swim.
Circle.
Square.
Kumquat.
Confusion. I don't know what that means.
Kumquat's a fruit, and it also sounds funny. Yeah, I always like that word. Next word. Winning.
Nothing comes to mind, actually.
Whoa.
It's weird.
Wow.
Winning, it's weird. Like nothing just comes to mind. Wow, maybe that just means like I'm not interested.
That was the most zen answer I think we've ever gotten. I don't think we've ever gotten like nothing before. Whoa. That was deep. And your last word is finished.
You know what? Nothing also comes to mind. No, I'm serious. This is so crazy. Both winning and finished, like nothing came to mind. But if I had to think about a word that would describe finished, is complacent.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like, hey, this podcast, have we made it yet? The process of making it is like, it feels like maybe there is a never ending thought to that question. There's never an ending goalpost. But then, you know, when you feel like there is an ending, then you also feel complacent, and you just feel as a creative, you can't really stop. And I feel like that's what we've learned a lot throughout our podcast. I feel like through this conversation as well, you know, that's the sense I get as well from your experience. And you know what? Thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on to the podcast, giving us your perspective, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you guys for having me here.
Great. Is there anything? What are your handles for guests if they want to take a look at like your work? I know you have Instagram.
Oh yeah, I just really use Instagram. I don't really put my work up much at all, but it's at DROOGIST.
Great. Lucas, what are your handles?
Everyone can find me across social media. I'm also like Matthew there, only on Instagram. So Lucas John Ng. Ng again is only 2 letters, N and G. Yeah, Josh, where can we find you?
You can find me at Josh Yang Comedy across all social media. Again, Instagram probably the biggest one, Facebook page as well. But you can also listen to the Sleep with Josh podcast. It's a podcast where I read genuinely boring material in my voice. So like laws, the dictionary. I've counted sheep for an hour. So if you want to listen to that to help you fall asleep, you can listen to the Sleep with Josh podcast. And of course, if you like what you see, like what you hear, follow our podcast, the Have We Made It Yet podcast at HWMIY podcast. And like, subscribe to the channel. Every little bit helps. And thank you for listening. Thank you again, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm probably gonna sleep to your podcast tonight.
Nice. That it's there for it. It's on Spotify. It's across everything. Give it a listen.
Exactly what I was looking for.
Oh, perfect. Kismet. All right. We'll see you guys in a few weeks. Bye.
Peace.
Bye.